Welcome to the Coalition of the Unweird podcast, where we celebrate voices shaping meaningful change. Today, our guest is Chelsea Miller, an award winning social impact strategist and founder of CPM Global. Chelsea's journey includes working at the Obama White House, co founding Freedom March NYC, one of the largest youth led civil rights organizations, and being honored as the voice of justice by the Oprah Winfrey Network. Featured in Forbes, Vogue, and more, she's a global leader in advocacy, movement building, and storytelling. Join us as we explore her groundbreaking work in connecting media, impact, and leadership. Chelsea Miller, welcome. It's a privilege to have you here on the show with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yes, yeah, we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say. I know you're one of the busiest people that I know, and it's all for the good of others, which is always great, right? So when we see that, especially these days, right, we have to celebrate that and understand how we can spread that to other communities and other people, because it takes more than one voice, of course, as you know, being a person who has gathered and led a bunch of folks to get together on a common goal. And we are in a place now, right, where we need people to join together organically and also from a structured perspective, right, so that we can better unite each other, make society work in the way that it was intended, and not strictly for the good of one side or the other. And I know you know this already, but Unweird, is the production part of Keep America Moving Ahead, which is a nonpartisan social enterprise, right? So we don't promote one side or the other in terms of politics, right? And even bigger than that, we are influenced by politics, because how could you not be, right, in the world we live in? But we hope to influence politics more than it does us as time moves on, right? As we unite these voices and get people to come together and remember that they are the driving force behind what our governments do, not just in the US, but globally, right? So having you here today, I think, will help us better understand from your experience, both in the White House as well as your community organizing experience and your civil rights experience, because you are a true civil rights warrior. Like, I know that's important for you to have people understand this isn't a one-off protesting kind of thing for you. It is a way of life. So thank you again for joining us.
Yeah, wonderful. And let's dive right in. And just give us a little bit, and our audience, a little bit of an intro of some of your story. What can you share about with us that inspired you to become a civil rights activist and a community organizer?
I oftentimes say that I don't necessarily think that I made the conscious decision to go into this work. I don't think anyone wakes up one day and is like, I want to challenge systems for fun, right? I think it really came down to being first generation American. I talk about that a lot. My family immigrated from Jamaica in the 90s. And for me, growing up in Flatbush in New York, which at the time, was a little Caribbean because there was so many just immigrant communities that were from the Caribbean that would move there, right? And try to create a sense of home. Obviously, Brooklyn has become very gentrified like many places, and that's a conversation for another day. But for me, just being able to see, especially when you grow up in somewhere like New York City, you are in such close proximity to everything all at once. And I think that because of that hyper visibility to wealth and power, but also at the same time, the very real realities of growing up in a community that was under-resourced, where our schools didn't have, books and the enough teachers to teach the students, to the point where my mom actually had to find a school for us outside of our school district. And I remember having to take like an hour bus ride when I was in the fifth grade to get to school. And I didn't understand why my classmates lived across the street. Parents could drop off lunch for them, and they were always going on their play dates. And, their parents were so involved in PTA and doing all the things. And guess what? My mom worked two jobs, okay? And who picked me up? It wasn't my mom, it was my older siblings, right? And so just like the core immigrant story, and not even just immigrant story. I think like low income, growing up in a country that again, you are hyper aware of everything all at once, and you see those disparities because you live it every single day. And at a certain point, you start to ask yourself the questions of, why is this? Why do I have to travel an hour? I would love to be 5 minutes away from, where I live to go to school. But the fear that my mom had of, I want you guys to get the best education. And guess what? My classes didn't look like me. And so being in those sorts of environments, again, it really challenges you to think, I don't want to be the exception. I don't want to be the only person that's here. I don't want to be the person that represents, the experience of Black girls in every classroom because I'm the only one. I want to break down the doors so that more of us can come behind, so that more opportunities for creating and transforming our communities and doing all of the things. And so I think that for me, it's something that was ingrained in me. And the last thing that I would say that's also really important to my story that I talk about a lot is that my mom actually was a social worker. And when she left specifically working with kids, she ended up opening a group home for young girls in our house. And so she turned the first story of our house into a group home. And so I grew up with foster sisters. And so I also talk about that experience of being exposed to, just the stories and the experiences of my foster sisters and being really frustrated at a system that did not work for them, that had them going in and out of homes, that, made them feel so lost. And then you just realize that there are so many stories of institutions, organizations, whether that be schools, whether that be the foster care system, that have failed our young people and have erased them and have erased their stories and their narratives. And how do you tell that? And so that's why I kind of say that I go where the work leads me, because I cover so much. And the reason why I cover so much, because everything is connected, right? When you talk about disproportionately, especially in New York City, young people that are within the foster care system, talk about the abuse to prison pipeline, all of these different things that ties into criminal justice reform and the work that needs to be done there. And so, yeah, I can go on and on, but all of that to say, I absolutely did not choose this work, but I'm so happy that I've managed to find my voice in this work and have been intentional about staying true to myself and my identity and the things that I believe while navigating so many of the spaces that I have.
In a lot of ways, though, your parents' story and now your story are, in fact, quintessential to the stories of this country, right? We're a country of immigrants. Immigrants come in, they come in and they try to become a part of the society that they've joined here in the US, right? And clearly the work that your parents did and then your mother and bringing other people in, right, as foster kids to try to help them uh, be better, feel better, and more united in this space that we're in, right? When she had just gotten here herself, really, right? And so that's an amazing story and a good backdrop for you, right, in terms of you becoming who you are, right, and are continuing to grow into being who you're continuing to grow into being. And so, I think we get lost sometimes in people telling the story of who they are and where they come from, and then either others shorting them by not realizing the similarities between how your ancestors got here and how their ancestors got here, right? And in large part, if we did a better job of reconnecting on those commonalities, right, then we could be certainly have at least more grounds to be a more united country, right, and your more united space, because there's far more things we have in common, right, than we have separate from each other. And in those areas that are not as common, right, those are the ones we should be working on, right, and to help us become stronger. And so, no, I appreciate the story of both your parents and how that has impacted you. So,
And in such a culturally diverse place like New York, you talked a lot about your influences coming from Brooklyn. How did that change when you got to Columbia? What were the differences that you saw, right? Coming from where you grew up in Brooklyn to going to an institution, down the road, but probably a starkly different atmosphere.
It was a culture shock. It really was. I mean, first of all, you had all of these kids that were coming to Columbia and were so excited to be in the Big Apple. And I'm just like, just don't go too far down the road now. Like, I'm like, it was, it was one of those things where I realized that my normal was not other people's normal, and my vision of how I saw the city, like New York to me is the concrete jungle, right? It is the place of opportunity, but it's also the place that will bring you to tears and on your knees, okay, because of the stress. And like similarly, I remember like the first few weeks when people were so excited to ride the New York City subway, and I'm like, the subway?
I
Like
was those
the
people at the
A
beginning.
train? The A train? I'm like, I'll pass because that's what I know, right? Like, and my memories of riding the A train isn't to, like, go to 42nd Street in a Broadway play. It's like to go to school and hopefully not get robbed by being out past 6 p.m. when the sun goes down. That different experience for me was just kind of jarring because I didn't realize how much people romanticize and glamorize the things that were my very real life. And I think there weren't that many of us who were from, right, inner cities who were a part of my class. Most of my classmates had gone to, either private schools or things of that sort, or, perhaps were legacy if that was the case, right? Like all of these things. And I was, first gen in a lot of ways. I was the first person in my family to go to an institution like Columbia, be around those sorts of environments. And one of the biggest things that I realized while I was there, and shout out to one of my roommates at the time who also had a similar sentiment as me, and her name's Akuya Obeng, and she's from Atlanta. She's Ghanaian, and we both came together one day and realized that like we didn't want to be the only, or I would say the very few Black women to take up this space. And this university was so rich with resources and opportunity. And if there was a way for us to open the gates and allow other Black women and girls that look like us to take advantage of this space while we were here, then we were going to do that. And so in college, that was actually when I co-founded my first nonprofit organization, and that was Women Everywhere Believe, which was a leadership pipeline for women and girls of color. And so we would host our convenings annually on Columbia's campus. At one point, we were bringing over 500 women leaders from all over the US. We had chapters across 20 universities where we were training young women on how you can partner with, schools that are close to your campus to develop the leadership skills of young girls in middle school. And so we were working with schools in the Harlem area on leadership development for girls between the ages of 10 to 14 and doing STEM education. And one of the things that we did is we did STEM to beauty because what? So many young girls love hair care, love all of those things. That is a part of the sciences, learning how to take care of your hair, learning how to make products, learning the science and the design of these things. And so we actually had STEM majors from Columbia who created a curriculum for them. And so those were the types of things that I was doing when I was at Columbia. It was never about me. It was about how do we disrupt and take up this space. And, that was one of the key things that drove my work at the time. That was around the time as well that I ended up taking off a period in school to go and intern in the Obama White House. And that was also a transformative experience. And so, yeah, my college experience, I don't know how much I felt like I was a college student because so much of my life existed outside of the gates of Columbia.
So to that point, though, because I know may be aware of this already, but we have and Keep America Moving Ahead some student ambassadors, right? And we've got one at Xavier University, Louisiana, two at UCLA, and then their intern, who's their coordinator, is in New York City, right? And so they're trying to grow that network. And can you impart to any student that sees this, right? Not just how important it is to be involved in the way that you saw the need to be and then subsequently did get involved? but some idea of how do you do that? How do you manage, getting those things done that are extra, or outside rather of your day-to-day school work, right? But meaningful to the world, right, and the community that you're in.
So I am an organizer by nature, and by fire or by force, it will get done. We had many challenges and obstacles and many things that one day, if I write a book, who knows if it'll even be included. But I will say where there is a will, there is a way. And we never took no for an answer. To this day, that is how I show up in the movement. That is how I show up in spaces. That is one of the things that is the driving force in how we have created and built and structured CPM Global. And so I think that the biggest thing, though, and this is something that I talk about a lot as well, is that you cannot create movements, you can only respond to them. And I think it's really important
That's
to
deep.
listen to what people need. When you try to put yourself at the center of the solution, you take away from the autonomy of others. And the entire reason that we believe worked when we had created it, the nonprofit organization, was because we knew it was not about us. And so we created the system and the structure to allow others to show up and lead in the ways that they needed to. And so because of that work, there were now women of color on their campuses that they couldn't, they were experiencing so many challenges with getting leadership roles on the clubs in the organizations on their campus. But now they got to create their own, and they got to design what that culture would look like. And they got to do work that was meaningful and important to them. And they got to learn how to be a president of an organization and fundraise, and a vice president, and do all of the things. They got to come to a conference in New York City again, some of them never being to New York City before in their lives, and experience being in community, And so I think it's really important to think about, at this given time, what is it that people need, and how do you create something that can allow people to be in community, feel supported, and feel heard? And I think when you do that, you'll be surprised how many people come together and want to be a part of it. And of course, maybe your first year, you may have 3 chapters, because our first year we had 3 chapters. And before you know it, if you are intentional and you really create the space for people, that 3 becomes a dozen, becomes 2 dozen. And before you know it, you are getting applications from India, because that is what happened to us. And I think it's telling of our leadership style and the space and the safety that we created for other people to see that. And so, yeah, and I would also say that don't feel this pressure that because you're doing something now, you have to do it forever. My leadership and advocacy has taken so many different shapes and forms. At this point, I may be a shapeshifter. I don't even know. And so I think that that's important too. Like, give yourself grace to evolve. Just because you're doing something today doesn't mean you'll be doing it tomorrow. To this day, right? We still have so many women who were a part of the network at the time when it was created, who we run into, who talk about, the impact of the work that we've done, the conferences that we've thrown. I remember I was in DC for the DNC, and I was at a mixer, and someone comes up to me and is like, I remember you from your conferences, years ago, and we used to bring the girls from New York, New Jersey to come and be a part of those conferences, to be in that space. Gabby Thomas, who now everyone's talking about, but I knew Gabby when she was a part of We Believe, because she was on the executive team of our Harvard chapter. And
Wow.
so very full circle, right?
Right.
And so it's one of those things where you attract the right people if you build the community and you are intentional about that. And so, yeah, and I think that that's the same spirit that I've used to take me into the work on the front lines. When I was on the front lines, it was the same work that has inspired my work with Freedom March NYC, that has inspired my work today, and will continue to do so. I lead, and I believe that's important for so many people to lead with a people first mindset.
And as well as anyone, you know, uh, people see the successful results of things and they're like, wow, I wish I could do that. That's great. But we also know that there's also some resistance that comes when you try to do things, particularly if they have a community or social impact nature to them, right? Did you have any obstacles in getting that all set up and moving the way that it could be more sustainable beyond just your time in college?
Yeah, so it actually extended beyond my time in college. We believe kind of came to a close, at least our chapter model system, because of COVID. And
Mhm.
so that is what really completely like impacted our organization because previous to COVID, we were actually getting ready to go on tour to different universities and colleges and schools and things of that sort within the New York City area. The biggest challenge for us, though, was we knew that we had a model that was really important, but we were so young
Mhm.
that we had the energy, we had the excitement, but we didn't have the funders. We didn't have the resources. We didn't like, we made everything out of nothing. Like if you knew the budget that we had and the fact that we were able to bring 500 women leaders to a campus for an entire conference weekend, most major corporations would put at least $1 million behind that. Our budget as a student organization was $5,000.
Mhm. I'm with you.
We honored Tarana Burke that weekend. We honored Misa Hilton. We did all these things. We had a whole gala, a $5,000 budget. And the only reason why that was able to happen was because of community. And so for me, when I think back to my journey and the things that have happened and the challenges that we face, it's come down to the fact that we have always known what we've needed as a community, but people in power and position have invalidated the fact that those are critical things that need to take place. And so if it's not the new, exciting tech idea, if it's not the new, sustainable initiative that's being built out and can be piloted across 30 cities and 50 countries and have some type of, AI aspect to it, then nobody cares, right? That you're building one of the fastest growing organizations for women and girls, and it's about community, right? And so I think that for me, it was that realization that we are always going to know what we need, and it is on us to be really intentional about how we create the sustainable models that support that. And so, yeah, I think that We Believe was ahead of its time, to be honest. A lot of the things that we were doing, people were like, how the heck are you pulling this off? But like I said, I'm very crafty. So there's that.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, you're always where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there. And the results that
Yeah.
come from it are the things that should happen, right? And so I'm sure that you have pulled on a lot of that experience in the last, several years to do the things that you're doing now, right? So
Yeah. And I mean, we've come a long way, and so but I think that it's important because to your point, people do see the really exciting big things and like you were honored on the Oprah Winfrey Network and all of these things happened and it's like, well, yeah, but I've also been doing this work for close to a decade, I was and so like before all of those things, before the Muhammad Ali humanitarian work, before all these things, I started in this work when I was about 15 years old. And so for me, seeing the recognition and the accolades, those are of course nice, it's affirming, but that's not the core driver of the work because there's always going to be times, there may be years, decades maybe, where you don't even get acknowledged for the things that you are doing. And that is perfectly fine too. And when that happens, create your own space. That's what I did. And I actually enjoyed that even more. Like I enjoy giving the awards, being the honoree is nice, but it's even nicer being able to see the people in your community who other people would not recognize and giving them the platform to be seen and heard and invested in and supported. And so that is why I think that especially even with Freedom March, when we started it during 2020, during the George Floyd uprisings, one of the biggest things we said was that we want to support community and other leaders. We didn't organize ever, besides maybe the first protest that we ever organized. But no, even then, that was in community. So yeah, we never organized anything alone. We always tapped on the leaders who were in proximity to us, oftentimes Black women leaders, we prioritized organizing with Black women leaders. That was important because of their proximity to the issue, because of the fact that if you know historically anything about the civil rights movement, Black women have historically been pushed to the back. And so we wanted to make sure that their narratives were centered in how we showed up on the front lines and in how we mobilized people. And so, yeah, I can go on, but I think my advice to people who may experience challenges is to remember that it is okay to be in a season where you may not necessarily feel like you are getting your flowers, and just know that even if no one sees that, your work is important and valid, and your story is important and valid. You know, as a Black woman who lives and breathes in my body and my experiences, of course, naturally, that's how I show up in the world. Everyone has a story. Everyone has a background. Everyone has a town that they love. Everyone has, people that they love, and their parents and their grandparents, all these things that make them who they are. Don't be afraid to bring that into the world and see how you can make the world better from it.
Yeah, no, and getting flowers is a great way to market your movement. But giving flowers is how you build community. And I think you recognize that and you utilize it to your benefit. I want to talk a little bit about something you mentioned earlier, which was your experience in the Obama White House. Can you tell us just a little bit about what you brought to the table, what you learned from that experience? And how did that experience translate to some of the work that you did with later movements that you created, such as Freedom March NYC?
Yeah, so I worked in the Domestic Policy Council in 2016, and that was an interesting experience because, I didn't know how the election was going to go, but I didn't think it was going to go that way. And so, I was very excited though, because of course, like, I grew up under the Obama presidency, right? And so for me, being able to have that opportunity to work in the White House and during that time, I don't know what it is now, but like you couldn't even post on social media that you were working there, and it was like don't tell any of your friends, and very top secret, right? Like this is something that shouldn't be disclosed to people. And so like I was just over the moon, but couldn't really tell anyone. And for me, it was interesting because it was just so much happening within our community. There were initiatives that were going around, like My Brother's Keeper. There was a huge focus on figuring out ways to bridge the gap between, um, you know, thinking through how to support. I'm trying to figure out the best way to say this, but figuring out how to support communities through issues around policing, right? And so for me, a lot of the work that I ended up touching was in the space of figuring out how to bridge the gap, right? It was figuring out how to understand the data around policing, understand how do you reach law enforcement, but how do you also reach community leaders? What are the opportunities to create organizations and moments that can turn into movements that exist even beyond the administration life cycle, right? Because again, it doesn't really matter who is in office. We still have a responsibility to serve the people. And so where do you find opportunities to serve the people? And so really taking a look at, okay, is that through NGOs? Is that through schools, right? Are there coalitions that need to be built? And so because it was that transitional period, it was really informative to me because I think I came in at a point where it was less about the excitement of it all, and it was more so about how do we, how do we, what is our legacy here?
Mhm.
And I think that that was a lot more powerful for me. And so yeah, it was an incredible experience. The leadership, the people, the things that I was exposed to, personally being able to bring in my experience of working within the community, of advocacy work, of thinking about the ways to make sure that we are having these conversations in an intersectional way, and talking about, again, if we're talking about criminal justice reform, we should be talking about abuse to prison pipeline. We should be talking about the school to prison pipeline. We should be talking about opportunities to really bring so many conversations. We should be opening the doors for people who historically have been put at the margins so that they too can feel like this is their White House. And so it was a reclaiming, right, of the space. And, you know, we obviously are 8 years later and in a very different place within our country. But I do appreciate, right, what that experience taught me. And it's just, it's a different reality, but we're here.
You talked a little bit about intersectionality. Can you tell me how you can manage different types of movements? How important that intersectionality is and highlighting it is to the success of the movements that you're.
I am someone who believes in collective freedom, and I think that you cannot talk about one without talking about all. And I think that we have a responsibility to understand that the reason why movements historically have failed is because we consistently allow ourselves to be divided. And so, if we are going to actually achieve the things that we want to achieve, when you talk about the work of MLK, when you talk about the work of so many civil rights activists, again, they were not stagnant people. Their beliefs and vision evolved over time. One of the things that MLK talked about a lot was this idea of the unity of people, right? Of talking about the issue around poverty, the issue around militarism, the issue around all of these things, and how all of this comes together as a way to divide, right? And so for me, when I think about this work through an intersectional lens, I think about the fact that we can't talk about criminal justice. We can't talk about advocating for Black communities without also talking about what that looks like for young Black girls whose voices are being erased. So if we can't talk about, you know, abuse that is taking place, and as a result of that, that is then leading them to go through, right, different systems like foster care, like homeless agencies, right, domestic violence, all of these things that play a part. And as someone who has lived at so many different intersecting identities, being Black, being a woman, being an immigrant, being a child of a single mother, being all of these things, I know how all of those things have affected me and have influenced my life. And so it's not enough for us just to look at a problem and say, this is one dimensional, so we're going to do it like that, without acknowledging all of the stories you erase in the process of that work.
What do you think, and today we deal with social media for its positives and its negatives, its power to bring people together. But it's the obvious downside of how it separates and divides us. What do you think we need to do to sort of drive the unity and mutual respect that the movement requires of us?
I would say that social media is a tool of mass communication. And like all tools, they are to be utilized effectively. You are supposed to understand what they signify and what they do in practice. And you have a responsibility to educate yourself on what that looks like. The problem is that a lot of us have a tool within our toolkit and we don't know how it got there. We don't know the instruction manual on it. We don't know the fine lines of what it means, and we are just using it for everything.
Mhm.
And we have a responsibility to ensure in this digital age that we live in, that we are not allowing ourselves to be consumed by something that is now no longer seeking to be the tool, but rather seeing us as tools. And so for me, I see media in general, not even just social media, but media in general, as a way for us to mass communicate, support with narratives and messages that can help shift culture and shift the world, and do so in a way that prioritizes storytelling. Why? Because if it were not for the stories of those that have come before us, how would we know what's possible? How would we know how far we could go and how we can achieve? There's a reason why books are being banned. It is not by accident that these things happen. You know, if you go back and you read history, there's a reason as to why, when Black folks came to America, it was illegal to read and write. you couldn't even know how to spell your own name.
Mhm.
And so when we talk about social media, do you think that that is for free? You think there's not a price attached to that? There's always a price,
Yeah.
right? And so I think that there's a responsibility for us to, one, realize that this was something that was created in the mind of someone that they then were bold enough to introduce into the world. And it will not be the first or last communication tool that is designed. Who's going to design and create the next one, right? Similarly with AI, it is a tool. Who knows? Maybe something even more advanced than AI will come out in the next 2 to 3 years, and AI will be a thing of the past. Who knows? And so I think that for me, I don't place too much of an emphasis on social media because misinformation and disinformation existed long before social media, right? It existed in the history books. It existed in the way that the stories were told, where, if you go to the South and you open a history textbook, it may be very different than if you open a history textbook in New York, right? Because things were taken out, edited, modified, all of the things. And so I think we have a responsibility to remember the fundamentals of what it looks like to, one, build nations and empires, and what it takes to build communities and people. And I think if we think through that, that will allow us to really understand what the next 10 years looks like, but also what the next 100 years looks like. And I'll say, as a reminder, for people who may not know this, and for those who do, depending on where the audience is listening from, America, the Declaration of Independence, about to be 250 years in 2026. Relative to most other countries around the world, we are a speck in the dust. And so it is our responsibility to decide what the next 250 years looks like. No one's going to do that for us. We get to decide. We get to tell our own story. Our story, in so many ways, is just beginning. You have nations across the globe who've existed for thousands of years. We are 250 years old. Think about it. Some of us have grandparents, great grandparents that are 100 right now, 90 right now. That that is, we're talking about anywhere from 4 to 5, give or take, plus or minus 2 generations. And so we get to decide if this is our story or if we get to create something better. And I think that we would be remiss to hold on to a version that does not serve the vision of where we are trying to go and honors the idea of freedom and justice for all and honors the idea of a democracy, because the idea of even a democracy is an experiment, right?
Mhm.
I mean, that's what it is. And so if for this experiment to work, it does require all of us showing up and challenging each other and figuring out how to make it work. And so, I mean, I can go on and on about this. Clearly, this is literally my work, but I would say that we have so much work to do and so much potential. And I'm excited to see how these conversations evolve around media and storytelling. I'm excited to see the way that we shift the narratives that are really harmful to our communities and to our youth and our children who will be carrying on, the legacy of this country. And I really do believe that if we have the difficult conversations, there is an opportunity for us to shift the paradigm.
Yeah, you just made me think about the number of times in the last year I've heard people quote, and I think it was Jefferson who said when asked, when the country first was formed, what kind of country is it? And he said, it's a democratic republic if you can keep it, right?
Mhm.
And we are certainly at a point now where many people feel like that's being challenged, right, in a serious way. From you know from our perspective, right, we try to create spaces where people can have difficult conversations in a non-confrontational way, because our thing that we talk about all the time is that differences of opinion should lead to discussion, not debate, not debate rather, but not
Not division.
division. Yeah, thank you. And so, that being the case, right, like we're at a state now where everything you just talked about is literally on the table and being exposed. The youth of the country and how we handle this kind of a challenge is really being exposed, right? And so, I recently had a conversation with someone who was asking, how is this happening? Like, why didn't anybody see this coming? And it's like, mostly in America, if you say you didn't see it coming, it's because you're not aware of the history of much longer democracies, right, or much longer states, period, right, in countries, because this is 1,000-year-old, well, not 1,000-year-old, but it's certainly a couple of 100-year-old plan. To your point about misinformation, about how they use misinformation to craft a government that can influence people in a way that one specific side would like it to be seen, right? And so where we sit today, it's kind of like, you can be astonished, you can be mad about it, but if you just go back and read the history of the world and not just where you are now, you'll see that this is something that's being redone, rebranded to some degree, right? But the same point, the same tactics are being used. They're just being enhanced by the use of AI and technology and things that we have to spread that around more, right? But that being the case, my question to you would be this: as you do your work now, and I know you do it, and a lot of it is focused on particularly African American women and Black women and girls, but a lot of it is not limited, right, to one specific segment of society. How do you, especially where we sit today, uh, bring diverse voices to the table? Do you feel like it's a necessity to do that in order to gain the advancements that you would like your movements to do, right? And then one, just how do you keep those voices engaged, other voices engaged?
Yeah, so I love that question because I think that there's a misconception that in centering stories or being intentional about including those stories, that in doing that, you are excluding others. And the truth is that it requires all of us, right? I have a responsibility to make sure that I bring my community into the room. I have a responsibility because of the history and the significance of that, right? And you can just look back 50 years ago to realize why it is important for when I show up to make sure that I do that. But it is also our responsibility to understand society, not just through the lens of our own eyes, but also through the lens of others. Because when you do that, it allows you to see that, and you said it earlier, that we're not that different, you
Yeah.
know? And so for me, with our work, we are always looking to bridge the gap. We are always looking to see how we can draw connections and connect the threads of the stories that we work on, specifically with CPM Global, which is what I love about our work so much, is that it allows us to draw on a larger community and tap into greater audiences to get the stories out into the world that mean so much and to create the initiatives in the world that mean so much. And so our Impact Council consists of diverse leaders. Our clients and partners are incredibly diverse and from all walks of life and places throughout the country and the world. And it's incredible because we may have a campaign where we're working on climate, but it connects still to, when you think about communities who are disproportionately impacted. Now you're talking about the global South that is predominantly Black and brown when you talk about climate resiliency and infrastructure. And so it allows us to really think about the ways that we are bringing in the stories that can help to drive change, but also are going to be most impacted by these things that are taking place in the world. And last year we executive produced a docuseries for the 60th anniversary of Freedom Summer with our media partners and clients that we work with and
Excellent
things of
series, by
that
the way.
sort. Thank you so much. And so for that, we were really intentional about how we bring together voices that come from all walks of life, right? So we had Black civil rights veterans, we had Jewish civil rights veterans, we had, folks from the North, folks from the South, we had all sorts of stories to come together to talk about what it was like for them in the blistering heat of Freedom Summer 1964 in Mississippi, when they were in their teens and in their 20s before they had the mass communication of social media and could only send letters to their parents, what it was like going down south and not knowing whether or not you were going to come back.
Yeah.
And in that, we were able to draw so many parallels between their experiences and the experiences that so many young people are facing today, of their fears and their courage and how they were able to see people. And I'll say there's this one specific part of the docuseries where one of the civil rights veterans, he's a white Jewish man who talks about that in order for Freedom Summer to be effective, they had to go down south and stay with Black families. And it was one of the first times in his life, you know, he was living with a Black family, and he was sitting at the dinner table with um, this little boy and his mom, and the little boy just keeps staring at him, and he doesn't know why this little boy keeps staring at him. The mom is like, "Don't stare at that man, that's rude." And the little boy turns to his mom and says, "But mommy, he eats just like us."
Hmm.
And that was one of the most pivotal moments for him in his work and his advocacy as this, you know, young white Jewish kid who was like, I'm just going to go and show up because these are my values and this is what I'm going to do. And in that process, he saw so much of himself reflected in a family that he otherwise never would have been able to, right? Then there's so many stories like that throughout our country's history of people coming together, right? And we come together in these sorts of situations, right? And we organize and we share our faith and our values and our love and in our history. And that is America, right? That is the cornerstone of why we are here. It is because we were brave enough, right, to do the things that so many people thought could never be done. And so I think our challenge is for the next 250 years, and because we're working on so many initiatives around polarization and coalition building and all the things going into this year with a lot of our clients and partners. And one of the things that we have to ask ourselves is, what does the next 250 years look like? And we get to decide that. And so if we are talking about that spirit of rebellion and that spirit of doing things that have never been done before, well, is this not the ultimate social experiment? Can we crack the code on this? And I think that is our challenge.
Yeah. Well, and to that point, man, I mean, so the fast forward from Freedom Summer to the mid 90s, and I'm sitting in New York in a place called International House, which is near and dear to me, as you know, with 80% of the people in the building being from other countries, and 20% American. And so, you know, I'm sitting in a room with a Japanese gentleman who is now one of my dearest friends. He's sitting there as myself and another guy who's a Black lawyer from Denver, American. And you know, after about we'd known each other, I guess, about maybe 2 months at this point, right? And my friend, his name is Yoshiyuki Minobi, he says to us, out of the blue, really, he's like, "I didn't know y'all existed." Right. And we were like, what do you know, we kind of were like, whoa, like, should we be mad now? Right. We were like, let's hear him out. Let's hear him out. Right. And so he's like, you know, we're like, what do you mean? And he's like, you know, my experience with understanding Black people comes from movies for the most part, things that I saw when I was living in Japan. Right. And none of them equal who you two. I didn't know there were Black lawyers who were also pursuing other other degrees and all that. And so, to your point about, you know, they eat like us, right? It's like I tell people, it's like this is not ancient history. The things that often divide us are just the ignorance we have about who we are, what we can do, and who we can be. And you know, to that point, right? It's like not being mad at Yoshi. It was like let's hear him out because, you know, if we had just jumped on him because of the way he said it, right, I wouldn't be telling the story today. It would have just been, we'd have never remained friends, right? We'd have just been offended. But it was like, no, you know, this is the thing here. We gotta hear what people are saying because it's not always said with malice. Sometimes it's just said out of their own lack of experience, right? And in this case, that's what that was. Now, if you talk to him today, 30 years later, Right. Because we told them at that point, we're not anomalies. Like there's a whole bunch of Black people out here who are doing a lot of really great things, far better than us. Right. And so,
And not just on this continent either, because
and
Black
not
people
just this
in the
kind
world.
correct, correct. And the funny part about the whole exchange with him though is that he had actually spent his undergraduate years at the University of Kansas. So we're like, how the heck did you not meet other Black people at Kansas? And he's like, well, the Black people that I knew at Kansas were mostly athletes, and they didn't really hang out with the rest of the common folk who were just students, right? And so he's like, I didn't get to see or feel who they were, right? And this was an instance where we're living in a communal, in a community rather, where you're forced to see each other every day, right? And not forced to interact, but you're encouraged to interact, right? And so because he was in a space where that interaction was encouraged, he was able to get to know other people better. And similarly to him, we were getting to know people we hadn't seen from all around the world. I came from New Orleans. You're talking about the people who come to New York and are like, oh, the subway. Ooh, that was me, right? Like and like you're talking about the feeling unsafe. I've never felt more safe than that time that I was in New York in the mid-90s, because every other block there was a campus policeman or a New York policeman or a transit policeman, right? That kind of thing. But so give us some grace when you see us
No, you guys get all
walking,
the
right?
grace. Listen,
Right.
listen.
But the thing is, right, that those are all unifying moments that people can have with each other, right? Because I mean, clearly we share ethnic heritage, but we just shared a difference, right? That could be dividing, right? Could have been divisive, right? And we talked about it, and it's nothing divisive about it, right? And the same thing happens when we talk to people from other cultures, we just got to keep those conversations going, despite and it's not even just America, the world in general seems to be retreating to emotions and safe spaces for them and individual groups of the past, right? Which is dangerous. Knowing more about the people around you and the differences that do exist shouldn't create this "I want to be aloneism," or "I only want to be with my uh, cycle, or my cocoon ism," right? It should make you more inquisitive and want to move out more, in my
And that's
estimation.
the downside to some of the wonderful things that we have with the connectivity that we have on a global scale today,
Yeah.
is that we're able to find people who are similar to us, who we have a lot of things in common with, and that can sometimes divide us because we are more comfortable with that group.
Mhm.
But one of the things you both mentioned was safe spaces to have these kinds of conversations, and how that's really critical to that unity. There's nothing like living with someone to feel safe to have a conversation with them. We have conversations at home with our family members that we might not have at the Starbucks or out in the world at the coffee shop or in the classroom. But it's imperative that we find those safe spaces, some of those safe spaces that you're creating in your movements, that really help us to find the things that we have in common, which we have far more things in common than we do apart. And I think some of the recent events and some mischaracterization of what diversity, equity, inclusion really is. I mean, the nation is a diverse place. The foundation
Mhm.
of the United States of America is about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's literally ingrained in our values as a nation. And so remembering that and continuing to help to create those safe spaces, I think is critical
Yeah.
for unifying us. And
Yeah, well, no, not to cut you off, but my theme for my entire adult life has always been, we're only as different as the commonalities which we have yet to uncover, right? And so the only way you uncover those is through getting out of your circle, out of your bubble, or having conversations. And that's not just about race; it's about gender, age, all the things, right, that could be used to divide, are all the things that could also be used to unite, right? And the movements that you've led, the things that you've been doing and are currently doing, obviously are putting people or giving people lanes within which they can have that personal growth, right? And you tell me if you think differently, but or some other aspect of this. But when people get into those lanes and they experience that growth, that tends to make us stronger as human beings generally, right? But more specifically to just jumping back to the continent of America, right? Like, I'm sorry, continent, to the country of America, you know, how does that help this country be better when people do explore and get into those different lanes, and particularly the ones you're creating, right? For people to come in and help to not just correct things that may be problematic in society, but also just to grow together, right? How do you see that as in your mission?
So I think that my greatest kind of characteristic is that I can sit down at a table with anyone and have a conversation. And I think that that's important. I think that a lot of us, and this has to do with the fact that we exist in a digital age that has essentially created so many people who no longer know how to show up in person, who now lack a lot of social emotional skills, especially you are talking about a post-pandemic world where so many people were isolated. And again, online is not a reflection of the real world. There are so many aspects that, essentially will put you in a rabbit hole, that will put you in an echo chamber, that will, again, an algorithm is not society, right? And
Right.
so I think that it's really important for us to go out and have conversations again. I think that it's really important for us to challenge ourselves to be, the person in the room who is asking the questions. A lot of people like to talk, and not a lot of people like to listen. And sometimes if we listened a lot more, then we would actually understand what it is that people are trying to say. I would also say that we have to be mindful that a lot of this is rooted in fear. And fear oftentimes stems from our own ignorance
Mhm.
or the lack of information, both of which are incredibly dangerous when they are wielded against you for other people's objectives,
Yeah.
political or otherwise. And so I think that it's important to just remember that fact checking is still okay. Asking your neighbors, knowing your neighbors, building those relationships with people in your community in real time is important. And outside of your community, over the past few years, I've done a lot of work around, the diaspora. And specifically the Black diaspora, and really seeing, right, our commonalities and understanding how the Black experience translates across continents and countries. And I think that it is really important for us to understand history, but also to collectively dream of a future where everyone can be seen. Over the past 2 years, I've done a lot of work as well across the US, right? Meeting different people from, you know, all sorts of walks of life, with whether that be leaders in the education system, to leaders of organizations, to leaders of foundations, to scientists, to, I mean, all sorts of things. And across the board, what you'll find is that what most people want is their own lives to be better and the people around them. And I think in order for that to happen, we can remember that we can still love ourselves and still love others. And it doesn't have to be a this or that. And I think the problem is that we've allowed the feeding of a narrative that is incredibly divisive in a way that has erased the importance of the fact that we have always survived being together. Humans are not designed to exist alone. Humans are not this entire world order and the structure of the world and how it was created was because of the mixing of groups, right? One group was really great at hunting and gathering. The other ones were really great at being nomads. The other ones did this. The other ones were great at constructing the ship. Someone else, right? All of these things. And that is how we have gotten to where we have gotten today. And I would also say, realistically speaking, we're getting to a point where there are so many challenges that as the human race that
Mhm.
we must face, right? And in order for us to address those challenges, we are going to have to do them together. And so
Yeah.
I think that it is important for us to remember that, inventions that we have today, the inventions existed because of the contributions of leaders and creatives and scientists from all parts of the world. Math, right? It didn't originate in the US. And so like it's just
Wait, are you
important
sure?
for us to, I know, right? Maybe, maybe, right? And so I think it's important for us to just remember that we are here because of the contributions of someone who probably doesn't even speak the same language as you. If you sat at a table with them, you'd be uncomfortable to have a conversation. And yet, because of their existence and their legacy, we are able to be here right now.
So critically important. And Chelsea, I know we're running on time here. So what I want to do next is just give you an opportunity to tell us what's next for you, and your movements, and just tell us what do you expect to see in the next year or two.
And also, can you tell us in this audience where they can find your wonderful docuseries?
Absolutely. So you can find the docuseries at cpmglobal.co/freedom summer. And for our work this year, that is the question, right? But we're still going to be here doing exactly what we have intended to do, and that is building community and creating the stories and initiatives that can help change the world. And so we're specifically prioritizing our portfolio to be around democracy building, coalition building, combating polarization, because it's going to be a huge issue coming up, and then not coming up here and continuing to come up. We're doing a lot of work within the higher education space, which is really exciting, to support a lot of colleges and universities around civics. We're working with our media partners to continue to launch campaigns that can address misinformation and disinformation online. And so we're working with museums and cultural institutions to help tell their stories in a way that resonates with emerging audiences. And so we're still here doing the really exciting work. And I'm really happy to be leading a company where no matter what, the work that we do is important, and having partners that also share that vision.
And tell our audience where they can follow the movement and the work that you'll be doing.
Yes, definitely. So you can follow me at the Chelsea Miller on Instagram. And most of the updates concerning CPM Global and our campaigns and the work and job openings and all of those things is always going to be on the website. So cpmglobal.co.
And before Wayne closes out, I've got two things. One, I want to officially welcome you to the Coalition of the Unweird, because we're trying to make sure that these kinds of conversations are flowing naturally again, and that people aren't afraid to have them, right? As we said before, creating that space for people to just talk, right, and be edified. So that's one. And then I'm going to ask probably the most difficult question in this entire podcast interview of you. And I hope you agree to come back, even though I'm going to ask this question before Wayne says his goodbyes. What exactly does a revolutionary such as yourself do for fun?
Oh, what do I do for fun? Listen, one thing about it, I have found my peace. So that includes a lot of self-care. I travel a lot. That is incredibly grounding for me. Usually I will spend the beginning of each year doing some type of sabbatical where I can spend time writing, strategizing, thinking about next steps. I do a lot of work traveling back and forth between the US and Ghana, as a place to really retreat, as a place to continue to learn about my history, right? And so I have found that balance, which I'm really grateful for, but I will also say that that took a lot of self-work.
Yeah, yeah. No, I appreciate that answer.
Very good, very good. Well, thank you, Chelsea. We really appreciate you for coming on the show. We think we've had a wonderful conversation here today. So hopefully,
And please come back.
please, we can.
Well, as long as I'm invited back, I'll be back.
You got an invitation that is perpetual.
Okay, great.
All right.
Like here.
Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
Keep the conversation going. Subscribe to Unweird and follow us at the Comma Community